excited. Well, good morning, almost afternoon, it feels like. Welcome to the September edition of the NOACC Chamber Focus Series. I know we have some visitors on today's call, so I will make sure to introduce myself. I am Cindy Holzheimer. I am the President and CEO of the Northern Ohio Area Chambers of Commerce. And I wanted to introduce, I know we have some board members on today. So we have our board chair, Missy McWhorter, our vice chair, Greg Church. We have our treasurer, who is Tony Gallo. Claudia is on, she's our secretary. Tim Anstead is one of our at-large board members. And then Dan Franks and Mike Wine are both on today. So welcome and thank you for being on. And then we have our programming project team that are responsible for helping really put together these kind of programs to help us, really further the mission of what it is that we do and really help with the development for our chamber leaders. So we're very excited and want to welcome all of you on today's call. All right, so we're very excited. This is a real pleasure for us to have Joe on this morning. And I have known Joe for a little while, and I know we've gotten to see each other at different IOM adventures. Yeah, so I'm super excited. And I get to read Joe's bio, which is very
the abbreviated one, please.
The what?
The abbreviated.
The abbreviated. It said short. It looks a
okay,
little
good.
I don't know. It looks a little long.
just the highlights. We only have an hour together.
Well, Joe is the president and chief executive officer of the Henry County, and I always say Georgia because we actually do have a Henry County here, Georgia Chamber of Commerce, and has been there since 2019. And prior to that, he served 14 years as president and CEO of the Aurora Regional Illinois Chamber, because we have an Aurora here as well, Chamber of Commerce. And then within 3 years of joining the Henry County Chamber, he successfully led them to receive ACCE's 2022 National Chamber of the Year. And that is a very, very big deal. The Worcester Chamber has actually gotten that as well. Joe is a 2009 graduate of the U.S. Chamber Foundation Institute for Organization Management, so that's IOM, as most of us know. He holds a bachelor's degree in public relations and a master's degree focusing on organizational development from Northern Illinois University, as well as a certificate for not-for-profit management from the University of Illinois at Chicago. That's pretty cool. He has served as chair of IOM's Midwest Board of Regents in 2012 and 2013. In 2017, he served as chair of the National Board of Trustees for the program and continues to serve as a faculty member. And his program is really great. I've been through it. He has taught on collaboration, industry forecast, strong chambers for the future, and marketing and membership. In 2007, the Aurora Chamber received its first accreditation through the U.S. Chamber of Commerce.
Cindy, I'm gonna stop you.
Stop me.
Yeah, that's the background that my mother wrote. So I don't want to bore everybody else.
But I want to make sure that I do mention this. So through ASAE, which most everybody knows, their conference was in Cleveland a few weeks ago. Joe has his certified association executive title as well, which most everyone knows. I have that as well. I'm very proud of that. He also very recently received his certified chamber executive, which is the CCE. So he has the full alphabet soup after his name.
I do.
And very, very, very well deserved. So I'm super excited. Let me pull down my screen share so you can bring yours up. So
all righty.
Very well deserved accolades.
Well, thank you so much, Cindy, and thank you all for joining us today. Let me ask, if I could, whether a show of hands or in the chat or somehow, how many of you have gone through Institute or are interested in going through Institute? Yeah, I recommend it highly. It covers all of the nuts and bolts to chamber management and all of the struggles that we find ourselves in and day out. And the peer group, Cindy, I know you can attest to this too. The peer group you get from the class that you go through it with, you stay in touch with them. And I've got friends across the country that I've been in touch with through Institute that helped me out of so many problems. So if you're interested, I would say definitely look at it. It'll take you through finance and government affairs and all of that. And if you're looking at the CAE or the CCE, it is definitely well worth the time that you invest in Institute to get that background. And Cindy, I'm suffering from the same thing where I've got my slides in front of me, but y'all over here. And so sometimes I'm looking at you and it looks like I'm kind of spaced out, but I'm going to do my best to manage multiple screens. You should see the title slide for strong strategic partnerships up on this on the shared screen. Is that correct?
Yes.
All right, wonderful. Well, we'll get started. This morning, we're going to just cover some of the different pieces within strategic partnerships. And I want to have this as a conversation. I want to really look at giving you some tools and then kind of getting your input on where you might use that. So I know that with the marketing and that we did already look at the African proverb that if you want to go fast, you go alone, and if you want to go far, you go together. It is so true. It's so much easier to decide that we're going to go do something today and just get up and go do it. But if we need that help, those resources of others, sometimes it takes a little bit longer because first you have to tell them what you're going to do and then why you're going to do it, and you got to sell them on it. So we're going to cover a few of the different pieces with that. Under the objectives for today, we just want to understand the importance of these coalitions or partnerships. And then we're going to really dive into some of the steps for effective collaboration and define some of the outcomes that we would look for as a successful strategic partnership. So now that we've covered that piece, let's get started. Share with me, if you would, again, through the chat or unmute yourselves, where would your chamber benefit from a strategic partnership? Where are you looking right now, or could you look to find ways that your chamber could take another step forward by finding and establishing a partnership? How about public affairs? How many of you have a dedicated advocacy professional on your team? I don't. I have a collaboration with about 13 other Metro Atlanta chambers that we work on our advocacy efforts collaboratively. And then that way I can put money where I really need to put it locally on the staffing side. How many of you have a dedicated finance person? We outsource that as well. So I think if you take some time, you can kind of look at when you're really looking at where you're putting those resources that you have, how many of them are going toward the truly mission focused areas of your organization, and how many of them are just making sure that your office door stays open? You know, do you have IT dedicated? We do not. We contract out for that as well. So think about those areas that you, as a chamber organization or a not-for-profit organization, could really take another step to add value to your membership if you had that ideal strategic partnership. Got some thoughts on that? Usually, we'll see that with the legislative pieces. A lot of times with endorsements, if you're looking, we've got a referendum coming up on some taxes, and we're forming a coalition of what we would consider normal partners, and then a couple that we would say normally we wouldn't play in the sandbox with them, but we are for this because we do share that one area of interest where we need to improve transportation. How about special events? We spend a lot of our time organizing special events and putting them together. And at the end of the day, did we really make any money off of it? Did we really move the needle? Did we do anything that we had to do? Or did we do it because we just felt we could do it? A lot of times, if you put a special event together, a collaboration is a great way to do that. You double, triple your audience pool, and you also have people to help you with those heavy lifts. So these are just some of them that I ask you to keep in mind as you're looking at what you're building out for your organization. Where is it that you would be stronger if you had that collaboration? And then just some of the, we've covered some of these, but why do you partner? Well, you've got the lack of resources. You've got a certain set of finances that you have. And once you take out your salary and your team's salary and your operations and overhead, what are you left with? Very little to do what you're there to do, for your members. And so if you can identify ways that you could partner and collaborate, maybe share one part-time finance person here and one part-time finance person in another organization, whether it's chamber or other, that person gets the full-time job, but you don't have a need for them 40 hours a week, maybe. And so think of ways that you can be creative about the way that you structure and organize your organization. A lot of times the opportunity just appears. A lot of times we deal with it in advocacy situations. The freeway is going to be coming through here. That's how this chamber started. I-75 is going to come through Henry County in the late 60s. And so a group of business people got together and created the Henry County Chamber because they wanted to make sure that the business community was there at the forefront as this interstate was established. Sometimes it's strength in numbers. A lot of times with the advocacy, that's what we find when there's 14 of us chambers going up there and all of our shared members and all of our individual members, and we can say we have 100,000 businesses and 10,000 lives that are all part of our chambers. And this is why we need to see this. That number gives us that strength. It also provides you the safety that if they're going to come after one of you, they've got to come after all 10 of you. And sometimes that looks a little intimidating to them. And then again, we talked about this, the additional core competencies. If you don't have the advocacy gene in you, if you don't have the marketing gene or the graphic design, a lot of times it's easier to create those partnerships. And we have another partnership with two other local chambers in the Southern Metro Crescent area. For the longest time, North Atlanta and Atlanta got all of the resources, and the Southern Crescent area of Atlanta was always left, kind of just pushed aside, the little stepchildren. Ironically, which is also, we have the ATL airport in the Southern Crescent, but it was put there so that it didn't disturb any of the residential neighborhoods and stuff to the north, which has turned out to be an economic boon for those of us on the south side. But we don't want to remind them of that. But what we did was about 2 years ago, the three of us created an agreement where we wanted to focus on really driving inclusivity and economic inclusion in the business community. It was 2020. There was a need for it. 2021 coming out of it, we wanted to do something big and in person. So the three of us collaborated to put this together because that way we had all of the resources we could muster. We had the giant population we could draw from, and we had a location, a venue that was perfect for it in one of those three communities. And so sometimes that's how your partnerships and coalitions come together. So if you look, the definition of a strategic partnership usually includes a formal or informal agreement. I would say go with formal. I've learned my lesson. Between two or more entities. And what you want to do is identify what those risks and rewards are and what your common goals are. Because if you have that, you know what direction you're pulling in. The other term that I want to use and share is the coalition. Sometimes this is more informal. This is, we're all deciding that we're going to go into Atlanta and go under the Gold Dome together on lobby day. It's informal. We just agreed that we're going to do this day and everything else, but we're going in there to shout for business. Sometimes that is less, a lot of times it's less formal, but it's the one common goal that you share. And again, the strategic alliance. These are more formal. These are often more long-term in what you're looking at. And a lot of times these are the ways that we can continue to do what we do, but keep our independence. And so when you look at a strategic alliance, everybody has their big picture items that they're working on, but then that alliance together is coming together for a purpose. In the case of the strategic alliance with the other two chambers, we're looking at economic inclusion. With the Regional Business Coalition, we're looking at the advocacy on behalf of our communities and our counties. And so you'll identify what that area is and how do you go about it. Any questions so far? I just want to cover some of the ground bases so that as we start talking and digging deeper, we have an idea of what level we want to be at. Then I just want to share with you a bit of Covey's habit 4. Everybody's aware of Stephen Covey and the 7 habits. But a lot of times the benefits of these partnerships, you can see the problem from another point of view. We're not going in there just focused on strictly what we thought. You can identify those key issues and concerns, determine what results you're looking for, and then identify those opportunities to achieve those outcomes. That is, when I sit in my office and I'm programming or budgeting or anything like that, and it's just me, I'm putting my perception, my interests, and everything else into that document. If I bring my team in here, we're having a more rounded conversation. If I start talking to my members, it gets even bigger and better. And so a lot of times that's what those strategic coalitions and partnerships will do is now you're forced to change your mindset, change your outlook, change what you see, and hear from another person if you're open to it on what does work, what they could benefit from. And sometimes what they want and what you want are very similar and can be done at the same time. All right, so let's keep moving. So we were talking a bit about maybe a partnership or an opportunity that we could collaborate within our organization. What would you need in a strategic partner to move that needle? So if you were looking at advocacy and you know that, that region of 5 chambers in Ohio is having water issues, how are you going to take that issue on if you're one of those 5 chambers? Who do you need at the table? You're going to bring the other 4? At least have the conversation with them? What about some of your non-peer members or non-peer organizations that could be partners within that? Is that an opportunity to work with Sierra Club? If they're on the same page, or at least know what their interests are. So if you are not on the same page, you know what you're going to be addressing with them. Your state EPA. There's a lot of different areas that you can kind of pull this group together. And what you end up with is you have your strengths, and then collectively you grow because of each of the other organizations' strengths that they're bringing to it. And so I recommend whenever anybody's looking at a partnership that they start looking at your traditional people that you would look at, but who would you normally not work with, but could be beneficial in working with them, even on this one-off project. Okay. In Aurora, when I was up in Aurora, it's completely different than Georgia here up there in Illinois. It is very, very labor focused. In Aurora, we had headquarters for 4 different labor unions. So, and many of them and many of the employers that were parts of the unions were members of the chamber. And so what I did when I started there was we had a fixed seat for the president of the entire group. There was a painters union, there was a pipe fitters union, there was a space, some kind of space welding something. But there was one group that collectively they all came together. And so the president of that group, of that larger group, had a seat on my board table. At first, everybody wondered if I had lost my mind. Probably had, but as time went on over those 14 years, it saved my hide a number of times, because what happened was something would come up, something would be going on, something would be addressed either at the city or state level where they were talking about fair wage or at will work or something to that effect. And we could have that conversation at the board level with labor having part of that conversation. And so they would know that in the end we were going to take this position, but they also realized that that's what, they were able to share with us what their position was. And so we could work together on that. I was fortunate enough that I had half of my state senators and representatives were on the D side of the aisle, and the other half were on the other half of the aisle, in the other aisle. And so what was really beneficial to go talk to them was if I went in there with a labor leader to talk about the needs of our community, they saw a D and an R sitting there trying to work it out, and that made them want to work it out. And so I think that a lot of times we look at where those easy partnerships are going to be. But I encourage you at times when you're really looking at some of these bigger issues that you might have, you might find a strategic partner that you normally would not want to be with, you wouldn't want to work with. But in this case, it would behoove you to figure out how you two could work together. And so a lot of times it's a tough decision, but it worked out well for us because whenever that labor conversation came up there, we knew where they were, they knew where we were, and we worked together to solve that problem. Here's some of the benefits. We talked about why you would want to do that. Well, here we've got the expanded resources, the technology. I think a lot of times you get new products and services out of it because you can have that conversation and say, hey, how are you solving that? I don't know. Let's work together. We're looking at ways down here because most of there's a handful of chambers that are above 10 employees. There's a handful, more than a handful that are below. If you don't have 5 lives in your insurance coverage, you're paying out, an arm and a leg for healthcare benefits for your employees. So we're trying to figure out ways that we can form a coalition within the regions to say, these 5 chambers, we're going to pool the employees, and that way we're going to have 10 lives that we can cover with insurance and save some money on our health insurance costs. So you'll find that you can provide new products and services when you start having conversations like that with others that are in the same boat. For us in Aurora, it enhanced our reputation with our elected officials because we were working at the same table as our labor groups. So it wasn't us trying to trick labor. It wasn't labor trying to trick the business community, but we were both working together to solve those problems. And again, that created more of an influence. I think too, it balances the weaknesses. If I don't have anybody on my team that enjoys and does marketing, it works well if I have a partner in that programming that does have strong marketing skills and can create the strong marketing campaign. We'll focus elsewhere. We'll focus on the logistics and on the programming and operations. But by coming together with others that have strengths that you might not have, it makes that more advantageous for that partnership. And to that point, I would suggest, how many of us, as the CEO or leader within our organizations, is comfortable wearing every hat? How many of us balance that role with people that have strengths and are much better at management, programming, finance, advocacy, any of those areas than we are? When we build our team, we're doing just that. We're creating those strategic partnerships for our organization so that we can make our organization stronger. So it's just taking this outside of the organization and going external to find things for our community and our region that are going to be better for us. Now, comes with risks. When I say that I don't have a strong finance mindset, so I want to have somebody on staff that does that, does my board look at me and go, wow, maybe we hired the wrong person? They might. But what I want them to understand is I have great strengths elsewhere. And if I am able to put my strengths behind that and not deal with finance or advocacy or membership or programming or communications or whatever that piece is that I'm filling in, what I'm doing is giving more of my 100% towards what my strengths are and less to what they aren't. And so I think if you watch that, you don't necessarily get that pushback because you've identified where those strengths are. It doesn't dilute your value. It does not sorry, helicopters overhead. I have no idea why. It does not make you a sellout. It just means that you are focused on the bigger picture and looking at what it is that you could do to leave that organization, that community, that region, whatever your focus is, better than where you started. I think that the biggest risk you do run, however, is the loss of some proprietary information. And so when you look at what it is you're going to do, make sure that you have that control, that everybody agrees if you're sharing proprietary information, that it stays confidential among that group, that is not shared outside, and that if it is, you have some great handcuff to get that back. Because the last thing you want to do is share your information, what your plans are, and then have somebody else run off with it. So keep that in mind. That is probably the biggest risk outside of the perception others have of you by admitting that that might not be a strength of yours. Any thoughts or questions on that? Okay. I think, how many of you have been through the accreditation process with the US Chamber? Has anyone? Okay, there's a piece in there where part of the process is creating an environmental scan of your region. I much prefer environmental scans than strategic plans. I think strategic plans have their places, but far too often we want to put all of our information in the strategic plan and then it goes into a 3-inch binder up on a shelf and nobody pays attention to it. My preference is that that strategic plan is a 1-page document that focuses big picture items and then what those little pieces of the objectives that would make that successful are. That's my strategic plan, 1 page. The environmental scan is done ahead of time, though. That's where you're going to look at your demographics, your economic factors, your housing, your taxes, your social and quality of life. You see where this is going? This is our community. This is our region. When we're looking at the infrastructure and all of that, we're looking outside of our organization. This is where we can play. This is where we can have the biggest impact. It doesn't necessarily drive what's internal, but nobody's going to be paying us our dues and our non-dues revenue for strictly focusing on our internal issues. They want to see what we're doing in the community. And so by identifying what our demographics and our economic factors are in our housing issues, our childcare issues, what can we do as an organization to impact that positively? That's what drives our strategic plan. So once we've gone through and done this research, we can put together how we're going to create that strategic plan, and therefore, what organizations are we going to partner with in order to affect that? We have a strong relationship with our school districts and our post-secondary ed because we have worked out what a workforce development plan looks like. And so by working with them and telling them what we want as an employer community, they're able to implement those pieces and change up some of the curriculum. We have businesses, we have employers that go into the classrooms, and if they're talking about, let's say they're talking about in geometry, angles and diameter, and that we'll have a pizza company go in there and take that pizza and cut it and ask them what that angle is, what the diameter is, what the circumference is. And so they're giving them some real world examples of why they're learning this, so that they can then figure out what they can do to apply it to their own lives and where their interests are. And that's just one of the examples, but we have this great relationship where our employers are able to go into the classrooms and provide real world experience. So I share that with you because a lot of times that's where we start identifying where those partnerships opportunities are. When you look, I think most of us in chamber world knew that childcare was a barrier to a lot of our employers and a lot of our employees. Nobody was listening to us. COVID hit. We had employers that were getting orders, but they couldn't bring employees back to cover those orders because there was no school, there was no daycare available. And so we had to get really creative. And I think that's where you start looking at those opportunities for you to shine as a collaborator and a convener, and bring people in there to say, okay, what are we going to do to address housing? What are we going to do to address healthcare, access to resources that they need? So I just want to share a little bit with you. This is the population growth in Henry County. The darker color is Henry. The orangish color is Metro Atlanta. So in the 1900s, Henry County was at about 25,000 residents, and Atlanta was about 500,000 residents. In 2000, see where it had gone with that dotted line, and then see where we're at now. We're closer actually to 300,000 residents in Henry than to the 250. What that dotted line is approximately the Centennial Olympics. People came to Atlanta for the Olympics and realized the quality of life, the environment, everything that was here, and they stayed. And so you'll see that then from roughly just over a century, um, Henry County quintupled in size. It was not ready for it. Nothing around Metro Atlanta was ready for it. They didn't have the infrastructure. Um, and so that is a huge issue that we're still facing today in 2024 is how do we get the infrastructure to support this huge growth? Also, what you'll see here is that larger section in the 1990s, that was the white population, the Caucasian population. Roughly 82% in 1990. Then with the influx following the Olympics, if you look at 2021, white alone population was down to 30%. The Black population went from approximately 10% in 1990 to more than 45% 30 years later. One other demographic that we've looked at from our environmental scans is the age of our population. So you'll see that in 1990, 8.2% of our residents were under the age of school. But then if you look at the orange, 22% were school aged. The gray is 25, almost 26 were our early earners. And at the top, the 65 plus was 8.3%. 30 years later, some of those pieces have changed, but I think the key concerns we have here is that in that gray column, our early workers have dropped from 25.6% down to 19.3%. The one just above it, the 35 to 49, the high, basically what we would consider high earners, went from 22.7 to 20.4. Our pre-retiring went from 13 to 20%. So that aging out, going to retirement is getting bigger. What's really concerning is that in 1990, 8.3% of our residents were of the retirement age. Half of that again. So we're at 12.3 now. You see what that does to a community? This is stuff that we as a chamber can't handle on our own. We know that we have to figure out how do we get more workers into the workforce because that economy helps with the housing and the purchasing and everything else of the goods here. But when you start looking at your retired population increased half again in 30 years, and it's heading that way because you look at the light blue below it, that's, that was more than half again that our 50 to 64-year-olds jumped. They're going to be retiring in the next 30 years. Do we have the resources for that? What happens when we lose them? The other piece to look at is your school age, that orange, that 5 to 19-year-old. That's pretty been consistent from 22% to 22%. But what that doesn't show you is the growth in the population over that time. And so that 22% might be double a number versus a portion of your population. So you're going to have to build schools. But your aging population who has a homestead exemption and other means of making sure that their income is easy to manage doesn't want to have to pay for new schools. Who's going to pay for those schools? These are issues that you run into in your community that you alone as the Chamber of Commerce or the United Way or whoever it is that might be there has to address because it's your quality of life. If you as a chamber know this is happening and aren't doing anything about it, you're not going to be able to recruit or expand the businesses in your community because they're going to find somewhere else that they can go that has that workforce they need, that has the education system that they need, where they're especially their C-level folks want to live, but even their employees want to live. That's where you need your partnerships and coalitions. That's why you want to work with whoever will work with you to address housing, childcare, education, Any of those areas that you know impact your business community, you have to identify who those partners are. Does that make sense? Questions? A little heavier thought than you thought you were going to get out of that strategic partnerships conversation, isn't it?
I have a question.
Yes.
If you can you go back to that environmental scan?
Yes.
So not to ask kind of a strange question. So, not thinking about some of these, where do you go to get some of this information?
That is a great question. That is a very good question. I would say, you've got the US Census that will show you all the breakdowns, and it'll show you within your business community the number of employers that are there, the sizes, the categories of industry that you have. Um, it'll give you your population and many of your demographics. Your economic factors, that's just kind of a brainstorming. Some of this is a great team building opportunity as well, because as you sit there and you start working through this, whether it's an internal team or a group within the community looking at it, what are your economic factors within your community? I told you about, our chamber started about 60 years ago when it was announced that I-75 was going to go through Henry County. That was an economic indicator that, thank God they saw that, because what kept us alive during COVID was the tourism and hospitality sector of our business. It didn't necessarily, it wasn't the accommodation section of it, but it was the retail. So as people were driving from Chicago or New York to Florida because they could work remote during COVID, and they thought, why not just take the laptop to the beach? They'd have to stop for food or groceries or gas or whatever it was. And so we literally made it through COVID with a few bumps and bruises, but we did not lose an employee. We did not forego any of our services. We cut back a lot on our in-person events, but we did a lot of it remotely. And we were able to do that because we had the resources and the foresight of establishing a chamber here with Henry County. So your economic factors, are you in Aurora in the 80s? They got hit by the economic downturn because Aurora was very much manufacturing. And then when they sold, merged, were acquired, closed, it really fell on hard times in Aurora. And so part of what they decided to do at that time was they were going to diversify their economy. And so they went out and found advanced manufacturing. They found entertaining. They found whatever it was that they could bring in there so it would not happen again. I think that's where you start looking at those economic factors. We're fortunate where we're located south of Atlanta, that we are about a half an hour from the airport. We are the southernmost section of the metro area coming out of Savannah and Brunswick, where it's, third largest East Coast shipping channels. And so they come off the highway of 16, come up 75, and we've got a lot of warehouses here. And then they can go from on rail or to the airport or wherever it is they're going. So look at what those economic factors set your community apart. Look at housing. I would say that we all have a struggle with affordable housing, in the sense that I will share with you the majority of my teachers, new nurses, and new public servants in police and fire can't afford to live in Henry County. And aren't those the ones that you want to establish in Henry County and to stay in Henry County and to build their families there? So what are we going to do to address that housing issue? Taxes. One of the reasons we moved out of Illinois was that our property taxes were 3 times what they are down here. Our sales taxes were higher up there. And so what are your tax rates? You can get that usually from your municipalities or your county, but you can go in there and kind of research the statewide taxes and see where you compare on that. Social and quality of life. A lot of us have surveys or know of surveys that are available where we can look at that, look at your parks, look at your walking trails. Do you have arts and entertainment? Do you have bike paths and walking paths and fields and that? Political, we've talked about that. Aurora was half and half. Down here, we're a little bit more red. But what are those political dynamics within your community, and how might you have to address them? Infrastructure, tourism, the communications pieces, and then of course always look at your internal organization, because if you have the need for somebody to work on workforce development and nobody has that skill, how are you going to get that done? Okay, so a lot of this you can find. I mean, you could start on just Google searching, look at Wikipedia, look at the government sites. Um, usually, and I don't know why, I don't know who this person is, but God love them. If you went on to Wikipedia for many of our communities, our counties, and that, you would find a decent listing on the start of this. And then you can start pulling other pieces around. And a lot of times the chambers will have some of this, they just haven't pulled it out in forever. So it's a good opportunity to update it in that. But I really recommend. There's some other sources that you can find details on completing an environmental scan. If you are a member of the U.S. Chamber, go look at the best practices for accreditation, because there's some darn good environmental scans in there as well that'll help you identify what that pieces are. Great question. Thanks, Cindy. Anybody else? It really is a great team building exercise, because people, when you know, in a chamber team, we all have our strengths. We talked about that. But if my focus is strictly on membership, or my focus is strictly on communications, sometimes I'm not paying attention to the other pieces in that scan. And so as we sit there and we brainstorm what those issues are, or what those pieces are, it becomes aha moments for all of us, because now we're all on the same page of what we're driving for. So what we did with when we started looking at the environment and looking at these pieces, we looked at the strong relationships we had with our school district and our post-secondary eds. But where were we with the United Way? Where were we with some of the other areas? What were we doing to work with the state to make sure that we were certifying enough seats for early childcare? And how are we building those pieces? And so that's how we established a lot of the relationships that we have, the coalitions and partnerships. So I recommend that as you start looking at what those are, realize that you don't have to solve this on your own. You just have to bring the people together. And that may not be you having to lead it. It's just like, hey, we need to have a meeting and discuss this. So with that in mind, what are some of those areas within your region that you would find beneficial in forming a coalition? Are you suffering? Are you dealing with childcare for your employees? Everybody have that solved?
Yeah, I was going to ask you a little bit about that, because we're a small community, but we're very industrial oriented in this area. And so we've actually been having some of these kind of conversations about, is there a way, and maybe this is, I don't know if it ties in with how you're approaching here, but is there a way for us to join the industrial employers together and providing a resource that they all share in? And I don't know if anyone's ever tried something like that or not. There's some leeriness, obviously, because the concern why I've gotten right off the bat is what happens when someone drops out of those cooperatives. That is a big issue that we've had conversations with trying to join people together on. Another one is occupational health needs that our industrial employers need, of maybe providing that kind of resource and joining people together. I'm just kind of curious if anyone's tried anything like that, and the successes, the problems.
Anybody on the call, have you had any experience in either one of those, early childcare or occupational health? It's in both cases it's being worked on. I would say there are some great examples through ACCE on childcare and what different chambers are doing within that arena. I've had experience with employers adding to their FTE count for 3 early childhood educators to bring them in, and then that's what they had, a daycare on site for their employees. I think you could look at it too, bring the employers together and say, what would it look like? How can we achieve this? And then start looking at United Way Look at your county and state government to see if there's opportunities that they're working on with that. The other one not to miss is any of your post-secondary ed partners who have that as a curriculum, whether it's a certificate in early childcare or an associate's or bachelor's degree in early childcare. They want to have that clinical experience. And so if you can partner with them, that you have one lead teacher and maybe each day there's 4 or 5 of those students in there to observe and learn, that might be a way to get around some of the full salary issue. And so it could save you money by partnering with the community college or university or whatever. But you'll see there are a lot. There's a lot of I can't remember if it's McKinsey. Somebody has some grants that they're looking at child care issues and how to increase the seats in these areas. And I think if you did a Google of like early child care funding, you might be able to come up with some of those foundations, and they're big national foundations that are looking at this. Occupational health, I think I think that's key. I think right now we're seeing a lot within EAP as well for occupational health, and working with
unmute, currently muted.
Working with your healthcare providers, if you have them, insurance providers, anybody like that would be interested. We're fortunate that we have Kaiser Permanente here as well as our Piedmont Health System, and they're more than happy to come in and provide some training on some of these different areas, because it gets them out. One, it's part of their community relations, but 2, it does get their name out to some of these employers that might be dissatisfied with the current provider that they have and would be interested in talking to others. But I think definitely look at some of those healthcare providers that you have in your area that might be able to help provide that. Any other thoughts or questions? Okay. I think, when you look at risks for both of those, Dan, as you said, what happens if one of the players pulls out? I think you have to look at that, and we're going to talk a little bit about a formal MOU, but what does that look like for everybody at the table, and how long are you in this agreement? The risks, again, that is a risk, the risk of not being perceived as even though you're the one that convened everybody and brought them in to talk about whatever it is, you are not the backbone organization of it, so you might be perceived as not helpful. I think that just goes with how we package everything and make sure we keep that in mind as we go about it. Just the different levels, I know we all know from networking on up. What I really want us to look at is that cooperating and collaborating. And we talked a little bit about proprietary information, but under the cooperating, that also includes, sharing that finance person, sharing that marketing person, sharing the advocacy person, whatever that is. What you're doing is you're just taking those resources you have and spreading them out so everybody gains from that. The collaborating, that is more risky, but you're also sharing in the rewards of that. You've got more people doing that. We talked briefly about the allies, so I don't want to belabor that. But I think when you look at this, the key to success is you have to have the integrity. You have to be trusted. You have to have that maturity to say, okay, I can't do this alone. I really do need to create this opportunity. And I think the biggest is the abundance mentality. That for me to win does not mean that Dan's going to lose. For me to win, Dan has to win. Claudia has to win. Cindy has to win. Eloise has to win. We all have to win. And there's an opportunity for that. There's enough pie there that we can all win. And so I think that's one of the biggest keys, because a lot of times you'll sit down with somebody that you want to partner with and they're like, well, what do I get out of it? Well, if you get to put this under your umbrella, then what do I get out of it? What do I lose? So I think that's where you just have to start setting up in those conversations to be like, okay, this is what we want to do. I will help manage it, and I'll have the oversight with, work as the employer of record for that childcare provider. But you have to help pay into it this way. And then that way you have this many seats in the child center for your employees. Things like that, so that you've got the win-win all across the board. Know your goals, know what you're doing getting in there. Confirm the agreement. And is it a handshake? Is it an MOU? A memorandum of understanding? Is it a letter of agreement? How do you make decisions? If we're going to add another classroom to the child care center, is that up to me as the backbone organization? Or do I need to go back to each one of you and say, I can add 30 more seats? What is your feeling? How does that decision-making process happen? And just identify what that looks like from a trust and a relationship standpoint. You've got to continue the communications. You've got to make sure that everybody's on the same page. And a lot of times that's tough, because I could be sitting here in this room with y'all, and Dan is gung-ho on getting this childcare off the ground. And then he walks out and he's like, it's never going to work. It's never going to work. It's going to be a waste of time. So make sure that you're having those deeper, meaningful conversations, so that if I know Dan isn't going to make this work, either I ask him to leave the group, or I figure out how I converse with him to make him see that it is going to be successful. Because if you're avoiding it, it's just like if you avoid one of your troublesome staff members, it isn't going to go away. It's just going to get worse. I just want to cover a bit too on the evaluation. When you're looking at creating this, establish those expectations. Don't assume that we're all going to know what the expectations are. Make sure you list them out. Make sure that you have that shared agenda. There's nothing worse. We all know from managing boards, there's nothing worse than a hidden agenda. So make sure that you have that. Make sure you have that buy-in. Make sure that if you hear of something happening in that environment, that you share that you don't keep that close to your chest as the power that you have to be like, hey, I know that the state is going to cut all of this funding next year, but I'm not going to share that yet, because I'm going to wait until it's closer to when it benefits me. Make sure that you're there fully and getting all of that. Before we go, because I know we're right there at that 12 o'clock piece, I want to talk a bit about the memorandum of understanding. These are just some of the key components I like to put in my MOUs when I write them. Why we're doing it, who is part of this coalition, who is the primary contact should something change, who's our daily contact, should you need that. What are the deliverables? That MOU that I have with the other two chambers for the DEI, the annual summit, has which chamber is responsible for which, no matter who's hosting it. If it's county A, B, or C, which chamber is responsible for the marketing and communications, which one is operations and planning, and then which one is site. And so it depends a little bit each time, but it shares the burden and responsibility for the entire event, but it also relies on those chambers that have strengths in those areas to be the ones responsible for something that they can actually do and add value to the piece. Finally, those updates and modifications, and Dan, you kind of alluded to that. If the employer wants to pull out of that agreement for whatever it is, what does that do? For our agreement for the annual agreement for our summit, basically you're still on the hook for any of those costs that we've incurred up until the point that you gave notice of your leaving that group. So if you go in real quick, Dan, and you can buy that building and everything else and get it all staffed, and then they can quit, and then they're still on the hook for it. But you don't have to deal with them at the table. But make sure you have the what ifs, the worst case scenarios, what happens when, because it might not happen this time or next time, but one of those times you'll have it in place and it's going to happen, and you're going to be so glad that you had it in place. And Cindy has a whole slide deck here, and if you have questions as you go through it, please feel free to reach out to me. I'll be happy to answer them. I just want to leave you with this slide here. There's a whole section on collective impact, but we don't have time to get into that. But that's where we talk about the backbone organization and who's going to do the main lift and who's responsible for what. But I'm happy to talk to you about that if you're interested in that. But here's just some of the things to be looking at as you look at what that partnership looks like. We had one on workforce development. In Aurora, I had 6 school districts that all served children from Aurora. And when we looked at the workforce development and that, we had 4 of those school districts come to the table with us. We had the community college, the 4-year university, and the city. And we signed an MOU for what we were going to do and what would happen if or when things changed. When I left there in 2019, there was only one CEO from those original partnership organizations that was still there. So as superintendents came and went, as mayors were elected or not reelected, as people were retiring, it made sure that as new ones came in, we could tell them what we had done, where we were going, and what their involvement was. We could renegotiate it if they wanted to, but it gave us that piece that said, this is your role and this is what you signed up for. Let us know if you need to change it, but that's how we can do that. A lot of times you'll see culture drift, especially if you start seeing a different leader come into that organization. My interests might be different from my predecessors or my successors. And so that'll change that a bit too. Having the wrong people at the table. If you don't have the decision makers at the table, you are going to slow yourselves down, because I can't say, yes, I'm on board with that. All I can say is, listen, Claudia, I'm sorry, but I'll go back and I'll talk to my boss and we'll let you know. And then depending on how soon I can get conversation done and a decision made, that slows down that process. And so make sure you have the right people at the table. Lack of transparency. That's that hidden agenda. That's that other piece that sometimes we've got weak leaders who perceive themselves as stronger, but they're only feeling stronger because they have that information they're not sharing. So make sure you have that transparency. And I think just be careful of those hijackers, whether it's politics or funding or anything like that. Make sure that you're going in there and you have that trust with others so that you can be like, otherwise, did you see the way he handled that? Do you think that was funny? Was it just me? Was I taking it personally? And then we can start kind of digging deeper to be like, yeah, okay, that's what we need to look at. So make sure you have some real strong trust and communications in that, because that's what's going to help keep you moving forward for your organization. Any questions? If Cindy hadn't read my mother's bio of me, I think we would have had more time. We could have got through more, but she loves to do that. It's part of her Christmas list. I appreciate you all. I know, I appreciate, one, that you are interested in learning more, because I think that's what sets us as strong leaders in the chamber world apart, is by trying to figure out how we can do it better and sometimes easier. So kudos to you for joining me today. I do appreciate your time. My contact information is in the slide deck. Feel free to reach out if you have any questions. If there's anything on Institute or CCE or ACCE or anything like that that you want to ask, I am here. I love this industry, and I really want to give back.
Fabulous. Well, thank you so much. I have a couple of quick announcements. We're going to say thank you so much to Joe. We really, really appreciate that. I took so many notes, even though I've seen a lot of this already. I took a lot of notes as well. So if you have to go ahead and go. I do have a couple of quick announcements, but we're going to say thank you so much. And